Good morning, students. Today I will be discussing Gitanjali by Rabindranath Tagore. Rabindranath Tagore was a man of versatile genius and many achievements. He was the first poet and writer who gained for modern India a permanent place on the world literary map. He mainly wrote in Bengali and translated his own creations into English. He was a poet par excellence, and all his writings, plays, short stories, novels, essays, letters, reminiscences, speeches, it was permeated with a rich fund of creative imagination. He traveled extensively and he visited many lands and peoples and he studied deeply their different principles of philosophy and life and enriched his various experiences with lifelong contemplation. He was born at Jorasanko, Calcutta on 6th May 1861 and his grandfather Prince Dwarakanath Tagore was an intimate friend of Raja Ram Mohan Roy. So his home was teeming with creative activity. He wrote, we sang, we acted, we poured ourselves out on every side. And his birth coincided with the dawn of Indian Renaissance, which found expression in three different movements, as you know, religious, literary, and national movements. And later he got married to Mrinalini Devi, who was a girl of 11. And he started his literary career by writing in Bengali. Banful is his free verse narrative which contained about 7,000 lines. And later he sailed to England with the intention of studying law. He went to London University, but this legal profession failed to attract him. After 1.5 years, he came back to India without a university degree. And during that period, in England, he composed many poems. Bhagna Hridaya is one of them, which is an expression of the young romantic poet's joys and sorrows. And later, he returned to Bengal, and Bengal at that time was dominated with new ideas and a new spirit in religion, literature, and politics. So, the works which came out during this period was also very vigorous and youthful. We have Sandhya Sangeet, which is a lyric of a very high order, which marks the beginning of his poetic career. And coming to the characteristics of Tagore as a poet, as I said earlier, Tagore is a poet par excellence. He said, I am a poet and nothing else. Even his plays, short stories, novels, essays, speeches abound in poetry. So there is no exaggeration in calling him a pure poet. There is no purpose, no conscious morality in his poems. And in this respect, he stands unrivaled. He says, my religion essentially is a poet's religion. Its touch comes to me through the same unseen and trackless channels as does the inspiration of my music. And he is also the epitome of Indian culture and has been accorded international recognition. But some critics refuse to give a place to Tagore in Indo-English literature because he primarily composed his poems in his native language, that is Bengali, and later he translated into English. And as you know, he was awarded the Nobel Prize for his English Gitanjali in 1913. And talking about his translations, he took liberty with the originals, and instead of attempting a literal translation, he actually rewrote or recreated them in English. He freely and spontaneously rendered his vision and experience into his transcreations. It is known as transcreations rather than translations. So he says his translated work is a new creation in itself. existing separately in its own right. So we have these works: Gitanjali, The Gardener, The Crescent Moon, Fruit Gathering, Stray Birds, Lover's Gift Crossing, The Fugitive and Other Poems, Fireflies and Other Poems, and other English translations of Tagore are remarkable for their lyrical quality and the expression of the poet's vision. So these English transcreations made him a world poet. And great writers like Ezra Pound, Crane were greatly influenced by him. And this is what W.B. Yeats said about Gitanjali. These lyrics, which are in the original, my Indians tell me, is full of subtlety of rhythm, of untranslatable delicacies of color, of metrical invention, display in their thought a world I have dreamed of all my life long. The work of a supreme culture, they yet appear as much the growth of the common soil as the grass and the rushes. So this is what W.B. Yeats said about Gitanjali. So he is a world poet. His originality and variety of themes, his mysticism, his romanticism, his conception of love, his peerless lyricism, his humanity, and the flawless perfection of his technique and versification make him one of the greatest poets of the world. So coming to the major characteristics of his poetry, first one is originality and variety of themes. So he was the versatile poet of his times, and his vast poetic output is characterized by variety of themes and originality. No other Indo-English poet, either before or after him, showed so much freshness, so much fecundity of imagination in glorifying common objects of nature, world, and human life. His themes are varied and he treats them in an original manner. He talks about common objects of nature, and in his 2000 odd songs, he wrote on God, devotion, love, nature, childhood, motherland, beauty and truth, humanity, about social evils, spiritualism, etc. And we also see this glorification of childhood, which is similar to what you see in the works of English romantic poets. So basically, his originality mainly consists of creating a synthesis between modern European thought and traditional Indian philosophy. And coming to the next characteristics, major characteristics, mysticism and romanticism. Rabindranath Tagore was primarily a mystic romantic poet who, like Wordsworth, added from his imagination a new light to what he saw and what he heard. And Tagore's romanticism has a typical Indian flavor. His true inspiration stemmed not from any of these great English romantics, but from the multiform streams of Upanishad and Vaishnavic thought of his own country. And as you know, Gitanjali is a superb blend of mysticism and romanticism. It finds expression in the wishful longing for the infinite in highly lyrical and passionate utterances. Tagore's romanticism finds expression in his feeling of awe and wonder at creation, at this love of God and nature, glorification of childhood, humanity, condemnation of materialism, love of simplicity, sublimation of the commonplace, and it is highly suggestive and it gives out picturesque imagery. And when you talk about mysticism in Tagore's poetry, Tagore's romanticism is closely related with his inherent mysticism. What is mysticism? Mysticism is an attitude of mind based upon an instinctive or experienced conviction of unity, of oneness, of likeness in all things. Its essence lies in seeing one undivided, changeless life in all lives, to see the one inseparable in the separate. So his work, Gitanjali and other poems are the record of the finest expression of his mystic experience and have a place equally in the mystic literature of the world as the finest poetry of our time. And Tagore as a poet of nature. He was a great poet of nature. His attitude towards nature is romantic. He passionately loves various objects of nature and sensuously and picturesquely describes them. To Tagore, nature is alive and is animated by a soul which subsists in all things. For him, nature is the manifestation of God. And he believes that the whole of the universe is permeated by one life, one soul. And Tagore, in his moments of inspiration, realizes this oneness and loses consciousness of this material forms under which this one life appears. And his love poems, he was also a poet of love. His love poems are remarkable for intensity of feeling and charm of form. He was influenced by Vaishnava love poetry, which describes the love of Radha and Krishna. So he interprets love in all its multiform expressions. He talks about the love of mother, love of son, of husband, wife, lover, beloved, and friend. And each and every one of these he portrays with the characteristics of softness. In Gitanjali, Tagore beautifully expresses in lyrics of sublime beauty love for God through amorous imagery. He brings this amorous imagery when he describes his love for God. This is what he says: "My song has put off her adornments. She has no pride of dress and decoration. Ornaments would mar our union. They would come between thee and me. Their jingling would drown thy whispers." And the next characteristics, it is his humanism. He was a person who was always aligned with the suffering humanity. His lyrics are suffused with humanism. He is the champion of suffering humanity and he vehemently condemns all religious rituals and fanaticism which divide man from man. So he rebelled against all orthodoxies. And he believed that a truly religious person will have this intense love for the oppressed and the persecuted. They have the love for the misfits, for the nonconformist, for the homeless and the rejected. So this was his idea. Tagore is primarily and preeminently a lyric poet. His poems are offerings expressed in sweet and unique melodies. Gitanjali, which is a collection of 100 ode lyrics, is where you see this excellent blend of music and melody, cadences and rhythms, spontaneity and brevity. And he has an unmistakable sense of rhythm and meter and mingles sound with sense in his lyric poetry. And the cardinal characteristics of Tagore's lyrics is their song-like quality. They are meditative and reflective and are remarkable for their spiritual character. Tagore's lyrics are universal in their appeal. They reveal emotions and feelings which are true to all ages and climates. Dr. Radhakrishnan rightly remarks. He says, Tagore will continue to enchant us by his music and poetry. For though he is an Indian, the value of his work lies not in any tribal or national characteristics, but in those elements of universality which appeal to the whole world. He has added to the sweetness of life. This is what Dr. Radhakrishnan talks about the universal element in Tagore's lyrics. And Tagore chose highly suggestive, melodious, and expressive words from a rich treasure. We find a rare felicity of diction, which arises from this use of apt and melodious words, which convey his meditative and reflective feelings. He composed lines of haunting beauty by his harmonious blending of words, music, and imagination. He shows a unique knack of turning his theme and verses into the inevitable spiritual purpose. His poetic style is noticeable for its musical quality, flawless ease, spontaneity, suggestiveness, and picturesqueness. And coming to this work, Gitanjali. Gitanjali was first published in 1912 and it won for Tagore the prestigious Nobel Prize for Literature. And Tagore's fame crossed the boundaries of Bengal and he became a world figure with this publication. It has been translated into most of the important languages of the world and its popularity has been continuous and worldwide. And it was composed in a mood of renunciation, which was induced by the deaths of his near and dear ones in quick succession. Coming to the structure of Gitanjali, the lyrics in Gitanjali are organized architecturally and arranged in logically connected groups. Each succeeding poem is related with the previous one and the one that follows. So we have the first group, 1 to 7 songs. It reveals the immensity and vastness of God's love and the deep relation of love existing between God and the poet. Second group, 8 to 13, it deals with the way how to realize God. He can be realized through love to humanity, according to Tagore. Third group, 14 to 36, here the poet describes his intense yearning for complete identification with God. And fourth group, 37 to 57, the poet reveals his intense joy. The union with God takes place. Fifth group, 58 to 70, here God also partakes in the joy born out of this union. And the phenomenal world is Maya, the veil which separates man from God. Sixth group, 71 to 78, the poet says that the man should realize the eternal through the bondage of separation. And seventh and the last group, 79 to 103 songs, the feeling of separation is the main cause of sorrow in human life. Here he talks about death. Death, which is the messenger of God, he says that it will make an end of this separation. So these are the major themes. Gitanjali actually opens up 4 worlds before us. First one, between God and human soul, God and nature, nature and the soul, and ultimately the soul and humanity. Gitanjali is actually a prayer to God. It consists of poems which are offering of the finite to the infinite. And its central theme is the soul's voyage to eternity. And Gitanjali is the realization of God through self-purification, love, constant prayer, devotion, dedication, and surrender to God through service to humanity. So these are the major themes. He talks about mainly about God. Gitanjali is a collection of devotional songs in praise of God. The motto itself is, I am here to sing these songs, the songs of God. The poet is intoxicated with the love of God and the immortal touch of whose hands his little heart loosens its limits in joy and gives birth to utterance ineffable. God is immanent and all-pervading, and the human soul partakes of his eternal glory. He considers himself to be a living musical instrument in the hands of God, who is the master musician. And there is a perfect and undying bond of love between God and human soul. And Tagore reveals this soul's urge for complete union with God. Next major theme is death. Towards the end of Gitanjali, as I said earlier, towards the seventh group, we get the poet's thoughts about death. And here the theme of death finds a varied and artistic treatment. He is not actually afraid of death. He welcomes it joyfully because he considers it as the gateway through which the union with God is possible. Death may look terrible, but it leads the human soul to the eternal. So death for him is not the end of life. It is actually renewal of life. It is the last fulfillment of life. And then the major theme is humanity. Along with the relationship of individual soul and God, the relationship of the individual soul with other men is also explored. He says God is with the poor and the lowly and the lost. Here, as I said earlier, he castigates all religious orthodoxy and he prays to God for the redemption of man from all those waywardness, slavery, misery which makes life miserable. And the another major theme is nature. The poet explores the relationship of God and nature. And in it, poet ranges over the immensities of time and space, the eternal and the temporal, and probes into the mysteries of life, of man, and of nature. And the poet's vision is free, vast, and serene. So Gitanjali abounds in beautiful and highly concrete and suggestive images derived from the infinite treasure of nature. And such nature images amplify the poet's spiritual and mystical ideas and feelings. Thus, lyrics in Gitanjali have a total unity. The sequence of thematic unities run through love of God, love of nature, and love of humanity. So it is the story of soul's liberation, a tale of soul's wait to meet her eternal bridegroom, the divine Lord, a narration of soul's pilgrimage and voyage to heavens of heavens. So we come to the prescribed songs, song number 1. So in song number 1, we get an implicit reference to the theory of reincarnation of soul after death, which is enunciated in the Gita. So here we see the poet paying his obeisance to God in a spirit of humbleness. The poet says that the soul is eternal and immortal, and such is the will of Almighty. He says human body is like a weak vessel. A vessel can be emptied and filled again. So human body is again and again dissolved to be reincarnated with fresh life. The body dies and the soul is reborn in a new shape. To him, God is omnipresent. And the poet is like a flute made of reeds, and he, God, is a skilled flute player who plays upon his flute. So here the poet means to say that the poetic talent is a divine gift. And he also gives out the idea that God's bounty is inexhaustible. He has been generously and profusely showering his endless gifts on man since time immemorial. So that is song number 1. In song number 6, the poet humbly offers the flowers of his life to God and requests him to accept it without delay. The poet says with great humility that his flower-like life is devoid of deep, enchanting colors and sweet smell. A flower without deep colors and sweet fragrance is not woven in the garland for the master's head, he says. Similarly, his life, he says, is also worthless, not a befitting offering for the master. So he cannot enjoy a prominent place or a conspicuous place in the presence of God. But the poet meekly prays to him to pluck this worthless flower before it is too late. So this is song number 6. In song number 50, he points out the importance of love and charity. The poet imagines himself as a beggar, begging from door to door in the village path. And all of a sudden, his eyes fell on a golden chariot, which appeared like a glorious dream in wilderness. And he wonders who was this King of Kings. And the poet's heart rose high with the expectation that he would give him some alms generously. And then this chariot stops, and quite contrary to his expectations, he saw that he was saying to him, "What hast thou to give to me?" And here the poet becomes confused and bewildered, but he gives him some corn from his wallet. But on his return to home, he empties his bag, and now he is in a state of shock because he finds a little gram of gold among this heap of corn. So here he weeps bitterly, and he has this sense of regret that he had not given his all to him. So that is song number 50. So here the poet glorifies charity and renunciation of all those worldly possessions. And then finally we have song number 103. So this is the last lyric. And in this last lyric, the poet bows down in salutation before God and humbly offers all his senses and all that he has at the feet of the divine. He longs to surrender before him all his joys and sorrows, his songs, his aspirations and activities. Here he communicates his final and absolute surrender before him through vivid and picturesque similes. He says, just as a rain cloud in the rainy month of July unburdens itself of unshed showers, similarly, his mind will offer its entire treasure of wisdom and thoughts at the feet of the divine. Just as a stream flows into the sea and becomes one with it, similarly, all his songs will flow into a single current and merge into the sea of eternity. And as the homesick cranes fly night and day to their nest in mountains to enjoy peace and rest, similarly, his lifelong ideas and ideals and hopes and aspirations will reach to the eternity. So, in short, his entire being is tired of life's journey, will fly to the eternal home, the place of eternal rest and peace for the soul. So this fine lyric is the poet's total offering of himself at the feet of the divine. So at last, the poet has realized the divine through complete self-surrender. So here we come to the end of discussion of Gitanjali. Hope it is clear. Thank you.